Hello everyone, and welcome to the next installment of a video series looking at one research project from beginning to end. So today is the data analysis video. We're going to talk about data analysis, but first let me catch you up because it's been a while since we've hung out. So first you can see the background is different than it usually is. I am not in my office on Lakehead U campus. I am at my home, and that is because I am on sabbatical at this particular moment in time. The only relevant piece of information there is that my dogs are home with me, so you may hear some barking in the background. I apologize for it in advance. Barking or, little skitters of tiny nails on the floor. Okay, so it has been a minute. So last time we talked, it was May 2018, and I had just finished data collection. It is now March 2019, and I have made very little progress in the time that I have been away. On this, I've been doing other things. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of competing demands on my time, and sometimes these projects end up being pushed to the back burner, which unfortunately has been what happened with this one. But it's fine. It's all fine. So shortly after data collection, I did enter the data. That was not particularly interesting, so I did not record it. But what I did do, I run some very preliminary analyses. And then in July, I submitted those preliminary analyses. I wrote them up very briefly in an abstract, about a 500-word abstract for a conference. And then I have not looked at it since. I haven't opened this data set since July of last year. In December, I got word that that symposium that I submitted as a part of has been accepted. So I will be going to SRCD and presenting this data. SRCD stands for Society of Research and Child Development. It's a very popular conference among psychologists, and it has good educational psychology content. So I like to go to it whenever it's on. So I heard in December that we were accepted for that. Which means I am going to present this data and this study at a conference on March 23rd, I want to say. It's the Friday. Ooh, that's the 22nd. I'm presenting it on March 22nd. It is currently, what's the date today? It is currently March 12th. And I have not opened this data set since July. So we got some work to do. Today's data analysis day.
Okay, so the first step in data analysis is actually making sure the data is entered correctly, which since I entered the data, I know it's entered the way that I like, which is each participant has their own line with all the variables in the individual columns. That makes it easier to not accidentally inflate your participant number by having to rearrange the data in a different way. Another thing I've done is I've removed all the identifying information, although there's some demographic information about each student here. I've removed all of their names from it, essentially, and replaced those with subject numbers or participant numbers, and that helps ethically keep the students anonymous. Since we're pretty sure the data is in good shape, at least entered correctly, the next step is to take descriptive statistics so we can see if the data is appropriate to analyze. So we're just going to go into analyze, descriptive, and descriptives. The details of that aren't really important. This isn't an SPSS lesson. Okay, so what then that spits out is called descriptive statistics. And that's going to tell us for each of our dependent variables. Here our dependent variables are vocabulary, LCK, which is literal content knowledge or basic comprehension, and inductive inferencing or generalization or knowledge transfer. Okay, so for each of those dependent variables, it'll give us the number of people that took that test or were part of the project for that dependent variable, the minimum statistic, that's the lowest score anybody had, the maximum, which is the highest score anybody had on that dependent variable. Then it'll give us the mean and standard deviation, and those we always report together. But of course, this mean is across all three of our independent variables. It's the overall mean for our dependent variable. And then it gives us skewness and kurtosis, each of which are measures of normality. Now, we're not going to get too deep into the statistics here. That's not what this is for. But in order to do the tests that I want to do, I need to have my data to be normal. So that's what I'm looking for here. So what I'm looking for specifically is for the numbers to be between -1 and +1. And that would tell us that we have a roughly normal distribution. In this case, the numbers are still quite high. They're over 0.5 or under -0.5. So that's not great, but it's good enough that I can do the parametric tests I want, and that's the key thing I'm looking for. Okay, so now the fun begins. We get to actually test to see whether our hypotheses are supported by the data. So if you remember from several videos ago, our main hypothesis was that there would be a difference in children's learning in terms of their vocabulary, their literal content knowledge or basic comprehension, and their generalization or knowledge transfer. So what we're going to do is test that. Now, because we made those hypotheses in advance, we actually already know what tests we're going to do. Those decisions were made well in advance based on how we set up our study. Now, there were some things that could have thrown that off. If the previous analysis hadn't shown normality, we'd have to come up with another plan. But because it's all systems go, that means we actually don't have any choices to make here. So we're going to go ahead with the plan that would have been already established. In this case, it's a multivariate analysis of variance, otherwise called a MANOVA. So exactly how you do this analysis isn't super relevant for our purposes here. The important thing is that for this analysis, we're putting in all of our dependent variables, all of our independent variables as fixed factors, and this also allows us to include covariates. For our purposes, we're including age because one thing I know from previous research, or that we know from previous research, is that age, even of a couple of months at this age, really changes students' eye movements. So we want to include that as a potential factor. And that'll tell us how the condition impacts knowledge without age being a factor. So the first thing I see is the descriptive statistics. And the first thing I look at are, again, the means and standard deviations, this time for each dependent variable, but broken down by the independent variable, which condition the students were in. And this is going to be really important when I'm displaying my data later on. Okay, now we get to the good stuff. I scroll down a little bit and I can see the multivariate test. So what a MANOVA does that's different from other tests is it tests a lot of things at the same time, which helps us get around type 1 error rate. So the first thing we look for is what's called an omnibus test. Here it's labeled a multivariate test, and it's going to tell us, for our condition, our primary independent variable, is there a difference somewhere in our dependent variables? We have 3 dependent variables, but this isn't breaking that down yet. This is just saying somewhere in our independent variables, is there a difference? And the way we do that is we go down to the condition row under Pillai's trace. I'm not going to get into why we're looking at that one, but that's the one we're looking at. And we're going to go over to the significance column. And if the significance is less than 0.05, that means there is a significant difference somewhere in our data according to condition. That condition has a significant effect somewhere in our data. And as we can see, the number is 0.014, so yay, that's significant. Okay, so because that's significant, and only because it's significant, that means we get to scroll down and see where in our dependent variables that difference is significant. So we can see, again, looking down at the condition row, it breaks down the level of significance for each of our dependent variables. And we can see there, unfortunately, only one of them is lower than 0.05. And that is the generalization score or knowledge transfer. And that one's at 0.017. You may also notice that vocabulary is at 0.088, but because that's not lower than 0.05, we can't consider it significant. Even though 0.05 is totally arbitrary, we still have to follow the arbitrary rule. Now, we're not done yet, though. Of course, within condition, we had 3 groups: fiction, information, and hybrid fiction information. So what that means is we still don't know exactly where the difference is. We know that there's a difference in generalization, but we don't know if the information book did better than the fiction book or vice versa, or what the hybrid book did at all. So in order to answer that question, we have to go to the next step. We scroll down a little bit further to get to pairwise comparisons, and that's going to give us the difference between each group within each dependent variable. So specifically, is fiction significantly different than the information book? Is the fiction book different from the hybrid book? Is hybrid and information different? And so again, we're just looking at the significance column, or we're going to focus on the significance column here, and I'm looking for anything less than 0.05. Now, it's really important that I only look under the row for the dependent variable that I know is significant, the generalization row, or here it's called II-ACT total. So I want to only look under that cluster. I can only look at those comparisons. I can see under vocab that 0.028 burning in my eyeballs, but I can't interpret that because the test above told me that there's actually no significant differences for the vocabulary dependent variable. So now I can only look at that generalization score, and there I can actually see that the information in fiction books are significantly different, and it looks like the information book is higher than the fiction book. So what that would mean is that children who heard the information book actually were generalizing more information than the students who read the fiction book.
Okay, so that's pretty much that in terms of the data analysis. Our first analysis went relatively well, and it doesn't seem like there's any good reason to do further examination of the data. You have to be really careful with how much data analysis you're doing, because you can the more you do, the more it's like data fishing, which is bad, and we don't want to do that. So we tested our predetermined hypotheses, and we found mixed, let's say, results. So we did see a big difference in generalization, and that will probably be the focus of most of our interpretation. We found something that we probably really can't do in vocabulary, although we're really going to want to. And nothing really in literal content knowledge, but literal content knowledge, that's actually not that big of a deal, and it might sort of enhance our other perspectives, because what it's saying is that you can remember stuff from any book. It doesn't matter how the book is set up. You can remember the content of it, but actually learning and transferring that information is a lot easier when it comes from a more pedagogically structured reading experience. So that I think could be really interesting and definitely worth writing up. And I mean, I got to do it now. We're going to, we have 10 days before we have to present it. So yeah, that's it for today. And you know, tomorrow I'll show you how we're going to display that data.